coming up with probably the narrative for the future. So in some sense, what you just spoke about is pretty much accurate. Narratives do tend to set the agendas, do tend to set the mood of the nation. And in some sense, that's exactly what India is going through. A changing narrative. Over the years, India was well known for its, maybe for its yoga, or Ayurveda, cricket, or whatever. The narrative is changing. Brand India is being built up across the world now. India is being now recognized as a country which is honest in its dealings. India is now being recognized as a country where technology drives growth. So you have Sunil Bharti Mittal, first generation entrepreneur, started from the grassroots and created an international conglomerate. You have a nation which is probably going to give Visa and MasterCard a run for their money with apps like eMap, which will make digital transactions so simple and so cheap, so easy, that it may change the way the world does business. The narrative in India is changing. And that narrative is changing on the back of a very simple fundamental truth that mega structures can't be built on a weak foundation. And if India has to prepare itself for the global challenges of tomorrow, we need to have a strong foundation, a framework on which we plan for not a year or two of growth, not a year or 2 or 5 years of prosperity, but decades of prosperity for the people of India. And clearly with the kind of opportunity that exists in India, 1 billion people aspiring for a better quality of life, I think there's no better place in the world today to invest in. There's no larger market to service than the Indian market, and there's no pole which is going to be more important than India, around which the world economy can flourish and grow. That's, I think, the narrative I see.
Thank you, Minister. Building from that, can I turn to you, Sunil, to talk a bit about the private sector's view of that, or another part of that narrative?
Thank you, Riya. Just build on what Minister Goyal mentioned here. If you look at the globe today, and I see it with my different hats as the chair of ICC, GSMA, in the UN and WTO, what I'm reminded of is what Ian Bremmer says, G0, a world without clear global leadership. I think we are today in an era where there is no global leader which has emerged as a custodian of global order. I mean, there was a time when the US could be the world's policeman, ensured to become the last backstop for the United Nations, for WTO, for IMF, put out the Bretton Woods Accord. I think that is completely missing today. If you look at climate change, if you look at mass migration, if you look at global trade, there is a complete confusion and battle. And if you keep that the backdrop, global backdrop, and suddenly see what's happening here in India, there's a refreshing change here. As the world has lost its narrative on global leadership, there's an Indian leader in the form of the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, who's emerged as a strong, very powerful leader who's driving not only now India's new agenda, but I would say the global agenda. Entrepreneurs like me grew up in the early days of reforms, but India was still struggling with its integration of the country, irrigation and agriculture was the mainstay, and looking at industrializing its own country. Today, just in the last 3 years, those 3 eyes have shifted into internationalization of India, into innovation, India becoming the innovation hub, or Indians globally being powerfully involved in innovation and inclusiveness. I think that's the new narrative of this country. And we are all inspired as entrepreneurs, the next generation, the startup India, the stand-up India is getting deeply confident about India's ability and its impression around the globe. India is taking a lead in the climate issues now. Minister Goyal will probably be able to talk a little bit more about that, but the fact is, India has gone out and made a significant commitment into the Paris Accord, where it's gone ahead and given commitments which were far, far ahead of what the international world was expecting us to do. And that is leadership. That's the changing narrative. Today, India is open to the world in terms of FDI. It's the
first one is India's own narrative, for India's own sake, for its own people, and that's jobs. My belief is that with 80% of the labor in India in the non-agricultural sector being in an informal economy, you cannot get productivity from an informal economy. Just cannot. Neither is the worker incented to get the right kind of skill sets, nor are corporations incented to invest in productivity for a transient labor force that isn't connected rightly to the way in which Sunil will think about the future of India out 10 to 20 years. And therefore, changing that narrative from informal to a formal economy is what this government has been attempting to do. Whether you look at it from the perspective of manufacturing, skills, digitization, improving bank balance sheets, really getting micro entrepreneurs, particularly in the case of women, going. Tourism, I think these are all ways to get formality into an informal economy. And I'm speaking of economics many years ago. I was reminded yesterday that St. Stephen thing that GDP growth depends on growth of labor, which we have plenty in this country. But multiplied by growth productivity. Don't fix our productivity. Not going to make things happen. Diwali and I were talking a little while ago. Women in this country are, in fact, in an even worse situation on capability of productivity. If half the population of the country cannot have that productivity, you cannot break out of this cycle and generate the jobs we need for this country to own its own talent. That's the first. The second narrative I believe India is ideally positioned for is what Sunil spoke eloquently. My belief is that with the withdrawal of a number of countries promoting the international order, this international order was set up after the Second World War. It's led to many decades of peace, despite the fractious nature of national governments. We cannot afford that international order. We left bereft of leadership. We have a very strong leader with a very strong capability, with a country that is full of exciting, entrepreneurial, energetic people. Why should it not be India's to be the leader of that system, to set the tone, to set the rules, and to say we are capable of being the leaders of this world? India needs to do a few more things to say that well. I think corporate governance, intellectual property, openness and market access, competing on the strength of our entrepreneurship, not on the strength of power barriers, power openness. And by the way, this is true for America. Please don't get me wrong, Piyush and I have talked about this many times. I am a believer that all economies need to think about the globalization of capital and labor if they're going to improve where they're going. But this is the two narratives. Jobs for India, for Indians, and a leadership in the world that India and its citizens deserve the right to demonstrate.
Hello.
I would like to close out this part with a bit about the economic narrative and also start to move in towards the societal and the social narrative. And I think maybe I can start because actually Ajay just mentioned Dipali's how you're part of that in terms of being very much part of the economy, but also looking at the issues, the productivity challenge, but also the gender challenge, but also having to deal with a very tricky trade situation globally. What are your thoughts in terms of the narratives?
I think for me, importantly, I think everybody has taken on the issues. I'll talk about my industry, textiles, and India, where India is primarily an agricultural country. And second to agriculture, textiles employs the maximum workforce in India, say around 35 million people. So when we talk about that, 50% are not employed. 50% are those women who are socially in a stigma. They are not educated, not skilled enough. So when we are talking about digitization, can we take that digitization back to the homes and their villages where they can be educated? We are talking about the modern world, but have you forgotten about the craft which is dying in this country? Can we take that up? Because that can employ the maximum people in this part of the country. That can give employment and also empowerment to that woman. Because if she gets empowered, that child will go to school. We are talking about water and the scarcity. But I think for us as businesses, can we become the agents of change? Yes, we can. And I think government is doing their bit, but I think we need to do our bit as well. There are those PPPs that are created in parts of the country, I might say Gujarat, where 30 million liters of water are being recycled. So the farmers get water to be using it for their lands and irrigation, potable water. I think that is the key. That is the key to what we can talk about. I think for me, the key thing that is close to my heart, and I think for India as well, and a lot of people will agree, would be gender diversity, social inclusion. In fact, also for the specially abled. It's not about just women. It's about the deaf and mute. Can we employ them? And it is happening. I think these are the threads in our country which actually a lot of developing countries would also be facing. And of course, I was speaking to Mr. Rakesh Mittal today about agriculture. I think when we talk about how can farmers be armed, we talk about digitization. When we say that smartphones, the growth of smartphones has gone up by 50%, can the farmers be armed with apps so that they can take that forward and see how the conditions of the weather is or the crop is going to be like? Create a Better Cotton Initiative, which has just been one initiative of its own kind. So I mean, I could go on, but I think that these are the key initiatives, I think, for me, and hence for the country as well, I feel, which is a developing country.
But thank you, Dipali, because I think I'd go back to that original quote from Robert Schiller about how stories going viral is a major driver of economic events, and that's really key. If we can, some of these positive, inspiring stories can go viral. And then with that notion in mind, I'd like to turn to really, I think, one of the more masterful storytellers that's among us, and love to hear from Karen in terms of what your thinking is about that future narrative.
Well, thank you, and I have to say that this is daunting and very exhilarating for me to be on this extremely illustrious panel and platform. I can only answer that question really as a filmmaker, because I see my perspective just the way I see my films, and I feel very strongly that we're at the interval point of our narrative, which is a great point to be at, because that's where you truly take stock of the situation. And as we all know, that the second half of most cinema is when things speed up and pace up, and that's my real feeling for the Indian economy, whether it's socially, politically, or economically. I believe that there is a certain glass half empty, half full syndrome that we sometimes suffer from. And we have to just look at things where the glass is half full and not look at it like it's half empty. Whenever I travel to Europe, there they're talking about their economy about being either flat or negative, and they're hoping for it to be flat and not negative. And here we still sometimes, there are so many, sometimes negative and pessimistic voices about our economy, but we're at 6.7 as opposed to the projected 7.3, and that's still not flat. That's still progress. That's still on our way up. And I feel very strongly that just like our films, our narrative is dramatic, sometimes melodramatic. It always has a tinge of humor, but eventually there's a happy ending. That's the way our cinema is. And that's pretty much my hope for the narrative of India, and will always be.
Fantastic. I really subscribe to that. And the narrative that we're talking about, that happy ending, of course, the person that's probably most closest, or the demographic, is really the young people, the millennials. Right. They will, as much as us, shape that future. They will live through that future.
That's the other thing that I have to add, that demographically, we're really one of the youngest nations. And, at 45, it's unfortunate that I can't talk about youth. But one can definitely say that being one of the youngest economies is definitely paving the way forward for so much ideology that is new, nascent, and yet very upgrowing.
Well, fortunately, we have among the co-chairs someone who could genuinely speak about youth, because she is still young, and I'd like to invite Malvika to sort of share her thoughts about that narrative.
Thank you so much. I've been lucky to be born into this generation which has been gifted with the sort of opportunities that our predecessors never imagined. I'm even luckier to be living in a time so ripe with possibilities. I belong to the millennial generation, a generation, depending on whom you speak to, is either the most enlightened or the laziest generation of all. However you skin the cat, it cannot be denied that Indian millennials pose a quadruple threat. They're highly educated, they are very well connected, they are diverse, and their population is higher than their peers in other nations. As a result, they have a greater participation in the social, economic, and political aspects of the Indian experiment than the other young guns who came before them. I got married during the stormy monsoons of 2015 in Chennai, during a time when the entire city was drowning. The youth of the city threw the first life jacket to the stranded, the hungry, and the dying. I witnessed firsthand how the entire city took up the call and the people mobilized to help each other in a way I had never thought we were capable of. Better education, complemented by better connectivity, have conspired to create a class of Indian citizenry who seem to be living by the Mahatma's mantra, be the change you want to see in the world. This change is only going to be for the better, with more Indians being brought into the realm of affordable education, sustained affirmative action, and digital awareness every day. Indian millennials find themselves in a country that is more aspirational than ever. Their parents and teachers have imbued them with an ambition to conquer the world. They see themselves as solution makers rather than as employees. They deem growth and experience more important than stability. They are more entrepreneurial than their parents and demand more out of life. The end result is twofold: a healthier free market and the promise of better governance. In an increasingly transparent world, Indian millennials are demanding a better class of products and services both from the industry and the polity. Business practices are being discussed on LinkedIn, and speeches made on the floor of Lok Sabha are shared on Facebook as much as the quirky cat videos that's supposed to be filtered. India, being the greatest cauldron there is, it is only logical that a disproportionate population of millennials is going to churn out the most value to the country than any other nation.
Thank you, Navkia. And I love that notion of millennials as solution makers. That's really great. Particularly as a parent, I hope my children grow up to become solution makers. And it does draw out something that we need to reconceptualize. Narratives about changing mindsets. Right? We need to think of millennials in a different way. We need to think of productivity. We need to think of all these different issues that have surfaced in this panel. And I'd like to have a second round of a conversation about, well, how do you use, what are the mindset challenges that you face? And how can we actually use these narratives to change? Because I think that's at the root of it, is how do we get people to change their minds through these narratives? And maybe I can come back to you, Minister, with regard to that, because that is, I think, part of your remit itself in your new portfolio.
And we have a railway system that over a century ago was initiated for a different purpose. But today has become the lifeline of connectivity or transport in the country. As I'm diving deeper into the system as it exists, I find that layers of bureaucracy have been built up over every single incident that must have happened in the last 100 years. So you have one problem, to address that you add one more layer into the working into the system. And over the years you've created a system that is very slow to move. It takes ages to get anything happening. And look at the multifarious losses to the Indian economy. It causes delays. It loses focus on costs. It loses focus on efficiency. And then whatever investments we are making is not as effective as it should have been. But I personally believe it's not a very difficult thing to change that mindset. I had a similar challenge 3 years ago when India had almost reconciled that we will always be short of coal, we will always be short of power in this country. Renewable energy was being looked upon with fear of very high costs, and very little was being done to really change on that. When this government came in, Prime Minister Modi gave me a few very simple nuggets, or I could call them commandments, very similar to what Sunil must be using or Dipali uses in her business, what Ajay must be grappling with on a day-to-day basis. Simple things like unless you monitor the work and hold people accountable, you're not going to get different outcomes. Very simple things like get as much transparent as you can and can address the challenge of corruption. Very simple things like go for economies of scale and implement fast, and you're bound to bring down costs. And when we brought in these concepts into the working of government, we found transformational results. Barely 15 months into my first job, we were able to declare that the country is power surplus, the country has sufficient coal. And for 18 months in a row, I had to regulate production of coal in a country like India, which was for the last 50 years short of coal. For 18 months, I had to regulate production of coal because there was not enough offtake of that product. I think the same thing can happen in the railways. We have 1 million+ people working in the railways. I think they're very sincere. I think they want to do a lot for the country. If we can provide that enabling environment, we can empower them. I have no doubt in my mind that once again that can become the vehicle which will change the dynamics or the economic perspective in India. I was assessing just about 3 or 4 days ago in an engagement with the top leadership of the railways what the investment potential in the railways is and what that could mean for jobs. And my own sense is that it may not be directly in a job in the railways, which then gets reflected in numbers, but certainly through engaging people in work in a variety of different areas across the system. Not less than 1 million jobs can be created in less than 12 months. Only in the railways alone and the ecosystem around the railways. The track renewal program, the safety-related maintenance program has such a large backlog that if I can aggressively go for that, that alone will create over 200,000 jobs. When I look at the amount of real estate that the railways has in terms of stations, in terms of prime parcels of land, and use that to leverage economic growth, also to leverage monetization of those assets, so that I don't have to stress my railway passenger with more costs. If I look at the amount of investments already in the pipeline and activate that going forward faster, cut down the bureaucratic layers, I think that alone can add another 250,000 jobs, existing projects. So I think the potential is huge. It's the mindset change which will transform India. We've seen that happen in sector after sector. It's the turn of the railways now. And look at the scale at which we've moved things. Yesterday the Prime Minister was talking about simple things like LED bulbs. It may sound very small, but our LED program today is leading the revolution in the world. When I go to Europe, every European power minister tells me that thanks to India's leadership in LEDs, they've been able to bring down their costs of converting to LED lighting. The United States is far, far behind any effort to try and really combat climate change through affirmative action. And we've been able to see transformative results. Just the LED program alone in the last 27 months, we've seen about 700 million LED bulbs being sold in the country. 700 million, with not a single cent of government subsidy or support. Now that itself is going to bring down our power consumption by about 11%. It's going to bring down the carbon dioxide emission by about 80 million tons annually. It's going to bring down consumers' power bills by $6.5 billion annually. And it will save us about $20 billion of fresh investments. Maybe some of the participants of this may not like that idea, but it will save the country $20 billion of investments in more coal-powered thermal plants in the future. So I think transformative results are possible. It's the self-confidence of the leadership and the vision that we provide to the nation that's going to determine future success in this country.
Those are very, Minister, you in a way summed up really the challenge and the opportunity here. If we can get that mindset change, it's really not, these are not simplistic, these are simple steps, but if you can get the people around, you can accomplish great things. And I'd love to invite others on the panel to talk about really how that narrative plus that change in mindset can lead to these actions that really have amazing results.
Can I
Please,
talk
please.
about it? Interesting. I'll just narrate a story about a girl of 24 years old, Avni Bhadra. She was part of a program with the world's biggest retailer and a manufacturer who traveled from Anjar to Arkansas. She was a child out of 6 girls, and she went and spoke about her experience in front of the leadership of the retailer in Arkansas. Imagine that aspiration that created for those little girls or young girls in the backyards of our country. Because when we talk about India, I think it's not about, as we talked about, it has to be at the grassroots level. And that's where, when we talk about growth needs to be brought to the villages, not the villages to the cities. I think that's very, very important. And I think that's where the whole beginning happens and ends. And I think for me, smart villages is again a very interesting partnership that I see. And when we see that why the change is not happening, are we making that step forwad to make that change? There are villages. There is Ralegaon Siddhi in Maharashtra, which has renewable energy. There's Odanthurao in Tamil Nadu with wind energy, and there are smart villages like Pasari in Gujarat, which are e-governed, Wi-Fi enabled, which are completely self-sustainable, organized waste disposal. I mean, if we can create those in our country, I think that's where the real India lives and thrives, and that's actually where, if we talk about literacy, if you educate girls, I mean, you educating the communities, you educating the women, the children go to school, and I think that's where we need to start and make a beginning.
I think one more area where we should have some focus, especially forums like these, are to talk about business as a force for good. Last decade, 8 to 10 years, has not been good for business community. There was a time when businesses were considered as force for good, not too long ago, and role models, celebrated business success stories. But in the last 5, 7, 8 years, as mentioned by you in your opening remarks, the disparities amongst the poor and rich have only widened. The distribution of wealth has not reached all levels of society. Small to medium enterprises are struggling to get credit from the banks. And all that is causing a lot of stress in the political system. How can we as businessmen start to ensure that the fruits of growth in any economy go as fast as possible down into the grassroots? The eye of inclusiveness, I will come back to that. How can India, therefore, start to work towards making business as a force for inclusive societies? I read a report yesterday that 200 top companies actually saw a reduction in employment in the last few years, and a significant reduction. And if these 200 top companies are not going to generate jobs, it's going to get harder and harder for the whole business community to pull the society along with it. And then you will leave millions and millions behind. And I think there should be some debate amongst ourselves as a business community as to how we need to have some social angle to the businesses that we do.
Can I just add a little bit? I think just to change the perspective from what Sunil just mentioned, we've had 3 major interactions under the auspices of Niti Aayog. We had Michael Porter coming in to talk to us, Bill Gates, and the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, Thurman Shanmugatnam. All 3 talked about the changing nature of jobs worldwide. And I think India is going through the same churn. What Sunil just spoke about companies bringing down their employment is a very good sign, in fact. The fact that today the youth of tomorrow is not looking to be a job seeker alone. He wants to be a job creator. The country today, in India also, is seeing more and more young people wanting to become entrepreneurs. And with the advent of 3D technology, manufacturing, with artificial intelligence, with innovation playing a central role, more and more people are getting engaged on their own and are looking to become franchisees, looking to become people who come up with ideas, people who want to be independent. I'll give you a simple example. Yesterday, I was assessing that I have about 2,000 railway stations where I don't have a booking office. These are very small remote stations which are called halt stations. So, and I often get requests from members of parliament that they want a booking office there. So while talking to my people, we said if you open a booking office, we'll probably give 4 people a job. You'll have 3 and then a replacement on holidays. So maybe the numbers on the balance sheet of the company or the corporation, the Indian Railways, will increase by 4. But rather than that, I would allow a local entrepreneur from that village, or maybe a young girl from that village, to take a franchise, take a small smartphone and generate a ticket out of her smartphone over there.
And I can help you do that better than Visa and others can.
At affordable prices, I hope.
Sorry, we have this goes on between us for years now, so don't worry about it.
So that'll create a person, an entrepreneur, who will be incentivized to make sure everybody who comes in there buys a ticket, because his commission is going to be what he earns. So I'm not stressing the balance sheet of the railways, which already is quite stressed. But at the same time, I'm creating transparency in the system. Everybody who comes there gets an opportunity to pay for his ticket and not suffer any ignominy on the way. And I'm creating a job which will never get reflected in any number. But that's the spirit of tomorrow.
Wonderful. And I know that you'll both have an opportunity to carry on this bit of a debate in the afternoon, but I do want to have Ajay jump in, because you've been working so much on this notion of financial inclusiveness, this inclusive growth, but also actually enabling it. So I'd love to just your thoughts on this piece.
Look, there's no doubt that for many decades, this industry has focused on those who are more affluent and more capable of using electronic payments. But I've been in this company 8 years, and I can tell you that in these 8 years, what started out as a conversation people would not listen to me on, which is the cost and evil of cash in an economy. 8 years ago, this was not a topic that was discussed at every government. Today, every government is discussing the cost of cash and how it needs to change. I believe we have played a role in creating a public debate on it. I believe we have played a role with the help of the World Economic Forum and people like Queen Maxima and Jim Kim of the World Bank to change the nature in which our technology can be an enabler for people to get to inclusive growth. A little secret about our company that people don't know. In the last 8 years, 360 million people in the world have got access to financial services through our technology. We don't make any money on that, back to the point about pricing. In fact, my view is what that's doing is it is making electronic payments and digitization ubiquitous. And ubiquity is in my self-interest as a company. So doing well and doing good should not be empty words. You have to prove with your actions and your balance sheet and your creativity and your people and your innovation that you care about this topic. My good luck is that my investors believe, because of the narrative we have built about how this is a key for the future of our company, they believe in my effort to make this happen, not just with partnership with people like Piyush here, but also in other countries, which, by the way, inclusive growth and inclusion is not an Indian problem. In the United States, 40 million people are considered unbanked and unincluded. 23 million people in the US pay their car insurance in cash every month. Developed Europe has 90 million people who do not have access to proper financial services. It's very easy to point fingers at the emerging markets. You got to start, the old Hindi saying, when you point a finger, 3 fingers point back at you. Just remember that. And that, to me, is what inclusive growth is all about. We are committed to it. We care about it. It's what we live with. It is today, using data, we are doing things on smart cities with Singapore, with Cochin, with a number of cities here. I think the idea of smart villages with the enablement that this government has done with biometrics. Because, yesterday in a forum, a lady said that women aren't allowed to watch their phone, and some Kap Panchayat in some town had fined the woman. And I said, if Saudi Arabia can allow women to drive, get those damn Kap Panchayats out of the system. Because it's time for people to stop getting taken in by old-fashioned ways of thinking when you have millennials like her encountering her visions for a future. Right? We can't live in
Before you
this.
get back, you must watch Toilet Ek Prem Katha.
Actually, someone told me. And that's such an important point.
Yeah,
So
that's very important.
So
That's the focus.
why am I saying all this? Transforming the way people perceive your company and what you do with it, your people, is part of changing the narrative. Today, to give you an example, in the last 4 years, 3.5 years, we've invested more than $500 million in India. That is more than the revenue I made in India in 3 years. Forget the profits, which are a fraction of that. And in the next 4 years, I've committed to the Prime Minister and Piyush's presence once actually, that I will put in another $800 million into this country. That's a total of 8,000 crores in 5 years. By the way, India is 3% of my revenue and 14% of my employees, and I don't have back office call centers. I have high quality technologists producing cybersecurity and mobile payment systems for the world from India. And to be clear, when I joined the company, my workforce in India was one fraction of that 14%. And that's because India deserves that investment, not because I came from India. I'm responsible to my shareholders. This is where the quality of cybersecurity development and mobile technology is going to break through the barriers that others cannot do. That's what I'm interested in. That's where my money is going, and that's why I believe if you want to change narratives, you've got to start from a vision and a passion, and then find the purpose. And that's what this government is doing. They're running the government like a company, and I wish companies ran a bit more like this government, and life would be fine.
Ajay, I think you point out something, the power of the narrative to get all your stakeholders
You have
together
to.
behind you. And
You have
that's
to.
really powerful. Now, I'm going to be a bit unfair to close the session because we have about 7 minutes. We've spoken about and we've learned and heard from you about some really inspiring narratives. But again, I said I would be a bit unfair. So I'd love to each of you to just pick one word as you think forward about what that would sum up your view of that narrative, and also the one issue that you'd like to see some progress being made, or a lot of progress being made, or really transformation to happen, to occur as a result of this summit. So again, I know it's about narratives, but I'm going to hold you to one word about what you think of when you think about the future, and one issue that you think this summit can actually move the needle on. Can I start with you, Dipali?
For me, one word would be social inclusiveness. I think that's very, very important because if you do that, you have a population of 1.2 billion people. You have the youngest population in the world. And if that happens, that's where you go. I'm sorry, I'm taking more than one word. But I think the key thing I would talk about would be agriculture for me. I think if you do that, because it's a maximum employer, let's face the facts. We might talk about technology, but India is an agricultural country. But the maximum rates of suicide, happening in the country, how can we, look at that? I think that would be a key thing that we should be taking forward in this. And I would see that as an important aspect from my perspective.
Thank you, Dipali. Karen?
Resilience, I think. To fall and rise is what the history of our country has always taught us. So I think resilience is the one word that comes to my mind immediately. And to answer your second question about, I think, what the India Summit for the World Economic Forum needs to kind of move the needle on, I think absorption, because that's what I've learned on this panel, is to absorb and then to emulate.
Thank you. Sunil?
Well, I'll choose hope. And I think our Prime Minister also very well articulated very well yesterday. We should never lose hope, because hope has a very powerful reaction in the society, and we should never lose sight of that one word, if you want, hope.
The one word would be attitude. I believe that we need to put an end to discriminatory attitude towards all sets of marginalized people. So,
That's the youthful spirit.
and the answer to your second question, I believe there is no better barometer of a healthy democracy than voter participation in elections. So I want to leave you with a statistic and a clever quip. The turnout of young voters in the 1998 Lok Sabha elections was 60%, 55% in 2004, and a whopping 68% in 2014. Many a pundit would have an explanation for this phenomenon. This is mine. India's youth are a lot less cynical of democracy. They pay into it, they wish to see it grow healthy, and they are unafraid of what comes of it.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I think trust. The fact that we can trust the people of India and the people of India can trust us is very important. It brings confidence, self-confidence in the system. And that also brings the can-do and will-do spirit into the nation. The fact that we can trust our own ability, the ability of our people, the ability of our nation. And once we trust that, we can combat climate change, we can combat terrorism, we can combat any kind of pessimism in the system. So I have full faith and hope that this country is a country where trust plays a very important role around the future.
Thank you, Minister.
I'd say my word is jobs. And I think that's where the focus has to be. That's the word. You asked for a separate second part, and that is, I was just thinking about a quotation from George Bernard Shaw, which I kind of typifies what people are saying. He used to say that a lot of people look at what they see and they can look at it and they say why. But I look, as he said, I look at what could be and I say why not. So my point is, what is India's limits of its imagination on what India can be when it is capable of unleashing what the government and people like these 5 colleagues of mine speak about on this stage? That's what I'd like to think about. Why not?
Well, let me close with my, as prerogative of the chair, to share one word. My one word would be a great thanks, not just to our co-chairs, but everyone here, because the commitment to be part of this, to actually to vest yourselves and your organizations to a higher purpose, to a higher cause, to be able to build that narrative that brings all the stakeholders together. There's nothing more noble and more necessary and more needed in the world today, and that's to be able to be part of that here with you in India, to be with the World Economic Forum as a platform to enable all the richness of the diversity of stakeholders to come together to build and create that narrative. It's a real privilege and an honor, and again, I want to thank all of you, but particularly our co-chairs for this really wonderful panel. Thank you very much.
Yeah.